Fight it. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started?
Be they a government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast. It's about observing cycles, sharing insights, and solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne.
And good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are on this beautiful blue planet. Take another breath and welcome tomorrow or the next week while we view this comet in the sky. This comet ZTF, I got some new coordinates, if I could talk today. Yes, I did have some pistachios. I guess that counts as a coordinate. Okay. Coordinates today are showing between the Ursa Major, which is the Big Dipper, and Ursa Minor, which is the Little Dipper. It's going right through the middle of those, and guess what? Draco is right there too. And you got to think, all right, going back in ancient history, you know, how much is this talked about? The serpent, the dragon in the middle of the sky. And for those of you who follow ancient history, the Chinese followed the Big Dipper thinking and understanding it was the Birkeland current that powers our star and our solar system. So they call it the seed point of human consciousness. Emanates from the Big Dipper. And there's even a worship around it called the Beidou Qixing, and that's directly in China, been for like 5,000 years. Even on the oldest of the tortoise shells, they still find, and on the oldest of the maps carved in stone, they still find the Big Dipper, the Beidou Qixing. That's how important that is. And then Draco, the dragon and the snake, serpent have been talked about time immemorial as well. And now we have a green comet screaming through the middle of those two in the heavens, in the houses of the heavens. But the comet has two tails now. It has an anti-tail and a tail, meaning that it's electrically interacting with the sun and it's pulling out in two directions and it's changing color. The luminosity is going to be visible with your naked eyes from now until like the 3rd of February. So if you look up in the sky between the Big and the Little Dipper, on a clear night, you'll see this green thing, and it should be expanding, getting larger and larger and larger as it comes through the next 6 days. So nobody knows what's really going to happen. But that's what I'm saying. Take a breath and give thanks that, you know, you're able to witness something like this. Here's the kicker. This comet hasn't been around. The last time it appeared here next to the Earth was 50,000 years ago. Now, I don't know how they can be that precise, but, you know, it makes a good story. But anyway, it's a long duration, long orbit comet, which again, you know, you look at the things happening today and everything seems to be on like these multi-thousand-year cycles, prophecies of thousands of years culminating, shift of ages, Aquarius. You know, all this is coming to this perfect storm of energies across the heavens at the moment. So energy man yourself, Ransom, thanks for joining me tonight to try to make sense of this craziness that's across the planet, along with the polar stratospheric clouds in the wrong season that attest to the water vapor in the mesosphere from the Tonga eruption in January of 2022. So anyway, I'm sure there's plenty to talk about tonight.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff going on. I mean, basically, there's a pharmaceutical industrial complex meltdown going on right now because of Veritas. Not that there wasn't plenty of evidence for the conspiracy theorist argument, for the last couple of years, but it's kind of gone one way. There's egg in a lot of people's face, but it's weird how culty things are that people are doubling down on their, even with the evidence right out there in the open. Of what's going on around the world, like Ukraine, for example, it's pretty obvious. I mean, NATO themselves just said, we're at war with Russia without declaring war for any of the countries in NATO. They admitted they are, basically at war with Russia. And then you have all of the countries, trying to deposit their weapons in the Ukraine. And I kind of wanted to get into that because it's a major point that, we've talked about before how Europe may collapse and reemerge as, a bunch of little communist countries. It's kind of like that now. It's more, still on the lower socialist end, but it's going full blown communism. The state is taking over, energy and food and where you can go and what you can say and what you can think. All of that stuff has been happening for some time, but now they've given up all their weapons. Basically, they have emptied Europe out of its capacity to defend itself, despite having two previous world wars that should have told them not to. It's kind of like the Second Amendment debate of, it's not about hunting, it's more about not being hunted. It's a self-defense thing, and that's going on. And then at the same time, they're admitting to, maybe directing evolution. I think that's how they put it there at the pharmaceutical company we're not going to name, just so we still stay off of the algorithm. But it's becoming obvious to everyone in the world, I think, at this point, even if they don't want to believe it or they choose not to believe, that there is a coordinated plan worldwide, including all the countries, scrambling for dominance of a one world super prison planet. That's what it is. It's a prison planet where every metric of every aspect of the human domain is going to be measured, throttled, censored, compartmentalized, as far as people being put into echo chambers in the technological social media world. They're all in little echo chambers where the algorithm is forcing them to either be agitated. And, as a matter of fact, Elon Musk, with one of his tweets, admitted as much, that the Twitter algorithm, for example, is actually designed to get you into infighting and arguments with other people that you don't agree with. Because the way the algorithm works is you see something that you don't agree with, or you look at something that you think is wrong or whatever. If you click on that or look on that, from now on, more of that kind of information will be in your feed. And, the revelations of all of these tech companies in bed with the governments around the world. It's not just our government. It's all of the governments. And when you look back at the last couple decades of how they've set this up, if you remember a couple years ago, they hired ex-Stasi people to run the Facebook going on in Europe to, know what people are thinking, what they're saying. And that evolved into countries arresting people for thought crimes. And now the reality is on us that they are pushing for some kind of, I'm going to say kinetic war. Hopefully they're not going to go and play with their toys nuclear, but even that wouldn't surprise me, considering that, we've already had 2,000 or more of these tests on Earth. They know it's still here. They know that they can go on past a war like that. It'll just be, some upheaval. So I wouldn't put it past them to do that, especially with the medical experiment that has gone on worldwide. And now the people, kind of the designers of that, basically calling the entire thing a cash cow. to get every last dime out of governments and people over, their new rules. They're doubling down at the world government level where they're just admitting, yes, we're about to do all of these lockdowns again. We didn't do enough last time. So the two sides of the coin are separating even more than they ever have because of, thank God for the internet. Even with all of its censorship, we still have the ability to transmit information and receive it worldwide, even, counter to their effects that they've been doing. It's kind of been backfiring. And then you have all of these programs working together while in the backdrop, they are about to starve you and poison you with food. And there's no doubt that they're doing this. They're all admitting it, from Bill Gates, you name it, that are in the bio industries are talking about how your food is now going to be giving you the thing that you may or may not have said no to. And you know what? They don't care if you say no. They're just going to put it in the lettuce. They're going to put it in the whatever other vegetables that they decide to put it in. And then they're also putting it in the meat. So all of your dairy products are now going to start delivering this. And this is part of the entire new technocratic system that's emerging in this great reset. So now is the time to start really thinking about these bizarre scenarios that you may have been hesitant before and thought, that's a conspiracy theory, or maybe you thought, they're not there yet. It's not happening yet. No, it is there. It's now. It is happening. They're pulling all their little plans and programs right now to completely transform the entire planet of what you think is the world is being reset right before your very life, right before your very eyes. And at the same time, they're going to be calling you crazy for seeing it.
No, I don't accept that world, and I don't have to, because my mind can interfere with that pattern wave as well in physical manifestation. Like, you realize that world you described is nothing more than a vibratory pattern holding state. And because I can think and my thoughts go out in the vibratory field as well, I can say no to that and interfere with that, and I do not accept that wave, and I will send my energy out there into the vibratory field of a completely different vision of the future just to cause that interference wave and stop that one from forming. That's my thought right there. It's like, no, I don't accept that. I don't have to. In my mind, I can, with infinite power, send that vibratory message back out there and change the harmonic frequency, pushing that development back. Now imagine if there's 1 million of me, or 10 million, or 100 million, or 1 billion of me, then that wave never manifests. That's when people say no. When people wake up and they go, well, it stopped when everybody said stop. No, it didn't. It stopped when everybody's thought changed in the vibratory field till we can no longer accept this. And you can start to see that massive wave of 20% into what had already manifested broken apart. It just stops when people say it stops. That's the way to describe it with English language and words, where they're not describing it in the vibratory pattern. But, Ransom, I want to bring that. You call it communism. I say it's more like feudalism, because there's good records of feudalism in Europe. The fiefdoms, the kings, the queens, the royalty, this sort of thing. And, it's been infighting in Europe in small kingdoms and like fiefdoms for how many years before that, prior to that shit. You go back to like 1120 in England, and they still have, the names of places named after that from 1,000-year prior battles of kings, and now Ireland fighting Wales and England, all these French and German, and you can use the Slovak army and, 870, these kind of thing. But I wonder why they're bringing us back to 1400. Why not 1800? See, what does it got to point to where it has to reset the clock back to feudalism versus just pioneering lifestyle? So there's two different levels of that. If you think about it, the pioneering lifestyle is what you consider the Wild West movies. People are out there, they're building a house, trains are coming, goods are moving, things are moving. Feudalism is you sleeping on the straw with the pigs in the back of the noble's barn. That's where they're taking it, or trying to. But again, my interference pattern of I do not accept that. I'll be self-sufficient. I don't have to consume. what they're offering, and Ransom just spoke of including extras into the food supply. Okay, it doesn't matter. I'm growing my own, I'm raising my own, and I'm influencing enough other people that they're also growing and raising their own food. And at that point, it just takes a few others, and that vibratory change moves through the third dimension, and what you consider space or the physical things in front of you are definitely affected by mind and multiple minds of it. And you know me, Ransom, I always try to take a note when you're talking. And the thing about Twitter, how does that overlay into my day today? I was trying to figure out, I'll even see if I can pull up some of these. And Ransom, I sent you a link to this rotary grow dome, which I'm working with Ted Marchildon, the Omega rotary grow dome. So that is their barrel that rotates the plants down to the water with LED lights in the center of a hollow barrel to grow lights moving around a ring, or grow plants moving around the light around the ring. So we're installing one of those right now. So back to your Twitter thing. I was watching Think Media's today, the next 5 big YouTube trends for 2023. Obviously, they're talking about shorts, this type of thing. So as you go through and peruse around and follow content from there, I came across this person trying to explain and had mapped out the YouTube algorithm pretty much like you described Twitter. Now see, the reason I'm telling you about this in such detail is it seems like they're all doing it. So once you know what the algorithm is, you can either try to game it to get your better titles in there, to get it on more eyeballs if you want to, boost your revenue, or you can actually see what is, how the world's going to coalesce as people actuate on this type of algorithm. So you're saying it's making people infighting. So what I have found is the way that YouTube is now working with its algorithm to put a video in front of a audience like Twitter does, they have what you consider, if you have a channel, your subscribers already there. That's like your core audience. So for example, mine is food economy and energy, and how those all dovetail into what we talk about every week. So my crowd is comprised of people who follow that information flow and how ancient history and cycles affects our modern world, and how it will into the future also affect based on cycles. More solar activity, less solar activity, more solar activity, more food, less solar activity, less food. How does that translate to the economy around you that you see currently? If we're coming into a less food abundant time, food's going to get more expensive. People will spend more on food and they'll stop spending on the essentials. And wow, what would happen? The economy would start to collapse around, and everything would be shrunken down into, it goes toward keeping a roof over your head, it goes toward keeping you and your belly of your families full, and it comes down to security and paying your energy bills, and nothing else matters. I mean, that's a complete market shrink down into nothingness, if that's to happen. So then you can trend that out, and then you start to look, see what the crop losses are, and then you would also see how governments would behave and how they would take care or control the citizenry when those two other factors happened. Massive food price increases because of declining crop yields, whether it's from a VEI 7 eruption like we had in December of 2022 with Hunga Tonga, or if it was from a grand solar minimum onset, and they're both onsetting at the same time. Okay, it doesn't really matter the end, what's the causation, but the end is way reduced global food output and crops, especially for the feed grains for the cattle and the feed grains for the pig and the chicken, let alone to feed the humans, right? And then the ethanol feedstocks too. So you start to look, and let's go with the animals. If you don't grow enough food, let's say your field production in the southern hemisphere is down 30% this year. So when it comes into harvest time, they'll be down at least 30%, possibly more, based on a bunch of factors about the drought in southern South America and the increasing UVB that's, had taken an effect August, September, October, November of last year. That's going to be declined. Where's the food for the animals come from? There's a lot of feed. Okay, there's going to be less meat. You see how? You see how it's going? Less meat. Where have I heard that before? Yeah, well, why did they know you would need less meat unless they knew the cycle of the grand solar minimum would knock crop production, which would knock the feedstock for the animals, which would then reduce the meat supply. And magically, they were already front running it, telling you have to reduce meat consumption. It wasn't about they just started it today. They just know this cycle in history and what it's about to do. So they're trying to control it on the way down. They're riding on top of a natural cycle. That's what my channel's about. If anybody's listening for the first time, and thank you for joining tonight, spending your valuable time with Ransom and myself. So that's my crew and that's my core in my channel that listens to me. So when I put out a video, it's about that, and then they test it on my core audience first. And they'll throw it to, and they'll get the engagement, and then they'll throw it out to an audience a little bit wider around the net. So my channel might not be the best one to do it for. So let me describe to you like this. If you have a gardening channel, you're super all over the place gardening. But mainly the people that are comprised of your audience will be involved and interested in gardening of some way, shape, or form. And then if you say, and then you niche back down, instead of gardening, growing green vegetables. You're not into fruit orchards, you're not into berry plants or anything like that. You're only into green vegetables in raised beds, that kind of thing. And then they can niche down, and then if you were a, let's say your niche was butterhead lettuce. It's the kind of lettuce that sort of has purplish hues along the leaf tips up there. So they're going to niche down. And when you release a video, and let's say I was talking about the top 10 green vegetables to grow this spring. Well, they would throw that out to the core audience of people who are following gardening. And then if it got really good traction, they would expand it out. And they're going in 4 different quadrants of different interests. So obviously everybody who's like 100% in gardening is going to watch the video. But then they're out there with like periphery stuff, trying to feel to see who might join that conversation. So that gardening, top 10 vegetable gardening, they might throw it out to somebody who's like a family channel with kids. Okay, and they'll see if anybody in that group over there grabs onto it. And they'll move that interest level based on 4 or 5 or 8 other groups that they're tossing it to at the same time. And as it moves, with more interaction on any one of those groups, it then starts to move completely to that group to find the interaction of best of that core group over there, which just kind of gravitated to, plus the core group, which say was for gardening, and then, family house planning or something, their family houses, okay, those 2, and then it spider webs out and it replicates that same thing. And what it's trying to do is group everybody in together in certain groups. And the way it does it is very similar to what you're doing, but Twitter sounds like they're going to do an argumentative version of the same thing. Because they're going to, I can already see it. They'll have an argument of, let's say, should there be tanks over there, yes or no? But then it'll go off onto periphery groups, and it might even throw that same argument on the feed into an agricultural group, and it might throw it into a shipping and logistics group, and it might throw it into freight forwarders and actually shipping lines, and that kind of feed of professional business inside that to get the argument there, because it affects everybody coming out of the Black Sea. And what they'll do is they'll test the engagement of any of that. So let's say they said there shouldn't be any tanks over there. Okay. Well, maybe they'll throw it out to somebody that's downstream of the export from Ukraine of the grains, like somebody maybe sitting in Turkey in an office that's there, and they'll see if there's any engagement on that on the English speaking side of anything. And they're going to do the same thing. They're trying to game out the core groups of each channel that is out there. And by doing that and moving it ever so slightly as the content's being engaged with, then they're going to reach out to the next largest batch of content Then they move you up and down the scale and to the left and to the right, and it's grouped into 3 different rings. And when you see it moving in real time, you're like, oh, that's scary, man. You're picking up everybody's thoughts in almost real time, engaging on that and pushing it. Scary times, man. That's like ChatGPT I interacted with too, which is pretty cool, but a little scary. But it seems like it's going like that direction too, where ChatGPT was something similar, where apparently, I'm just reading and regurgitating what I've read other people talk about it. It's also trying to gauge what you put in there as your interest on how it can read you as a human. And remember, anytime that you click that says, are you a robot? And you press no, the way you're not just pressing no because you clicked it. That no, when you click it, allows it to read your entire browser history to make sure that you're a human. Because obviously a bot's not going to be going through with so many diverse things or so many similar things unless you program that AI really well. And that machine learning really needs to be tight to get it to open all those pages. So then ChatGPT gets all of your entire browsing information and all the questions you interact with it. And then it makes a profile on you also that is very similar to what the Twitter seems like argument model will be, or the YouTube. I don't even know what they call that algorithm. I mean, Twitter would be an argument algorithm, but YouTube is more of a real-time movement of engagement, tinkering on different people's interests to see if they can draw you into a group that you wouldn't normally be in. And before it was just pretty much like interest, and they would put featured things, but this time, the entire video is being shown to different selections of people, which is way different than it used to be. It's way different. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on it, because all those 3 things pretty much dovetail into one. So like, how are we being gamed now with all of our thoughts out there on the net? That's crazy. Like, it's all being used against, well, I wouldn't say against us, but it's just being used in a different way to map everybody on the planet. Your thought, literally down to the second.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And that's what I was kind of talking about. And when I say communism, I mean, that's just communism for the people. It's feudalism at top. I've talked about that before. The feudalist style of government is exactly what that they want to go back to. But in order to do that, they have to depopulate to some degree, or they won't have control on their little governorships like they want. The difference being now, they're using the technology that they have at hand to manipulate their control over their little, governorships. And that's exactly what we saw during this medical situation the last couple of years, is each little country and their little dictator governorship, including each state in the union, had, depending on who was governing, shut down things, mandated things, made rules about the government. We've got into that before, where they create a situation where it's really hard to deal with anything in person and not deal with an AI. And they're using the AI as a buffer between them and, the communist sector. It's the forced communist capitalist type system where they give you all the products. You have to buy those products. Those products have certain ingredients in it that goes directly to your gut and to your, your whole system, changing the way you think, changing your mood. We know that this is a fact, that foods and different toxins affect your mood, and that starts in the gut, partially from our biome that we have. And then when you start thinking about that, what are they actually doing? Well, they're trying to manipulate your biome inside your body. And now that we know all of this is happening, it's like what you were saying. I don't want to live in that world, right? I don't want to live in that matrix of control. I don't want to eat their products anymore now that I know what they are. It started with GMOs in like 1991, and now you have whole generations of people that have been eating 90% products that were genetically modified for a specific purpose. Now, they give their purposes, whether or not you believe that or not, that's up to you. But if we fast forward into 2020, whatever, we have people admitting what their purposes are for the changes in the biome, and what they're calling from their own mouth now, directed evolution, where they're creating situations where they're loopholing the law about not gain of functioning things. Instead, just
you
put
can't
them
say
into.
those words. Those are bad words to say,
Oh
man.
yeah. Well,
That's
I think
going to be
that's
the next biggest thing coming down to stop the conversation on is exactly what you're saying there. The information that broke, it's going into overtime to cover it.
Let's use their new terminology, because they're saying they're not doing that anyway. They're forcing evolution or directing evolution by creating situations where things mutate abnormally. In other words, not like they would have in nature, or not like they would have in a normal situation of spread. Instead, they're creating mutated things by situation instead of by, so they're creating a world that has all avenues of manipulation of life. And that's what it is. So we are at that point, and now we have to say, like you said, no, I don't want to live in that. I don't want to feel like that. I don't want to think like that. I don't want to be part of that system. And what's the answer to that? The answer to that is to be completely self-sufficient beyond anything that you imagined before. And I'm talking back in the days where they were still trying to pull the feudalist style government, but more along the lines of the expansion of the west of the U.S. And I know some people get, mad about that because of the way the events unfolded, but I can't do nothing about that. That's how they happened. And that's why we're here today. But now we have to deal with it. And they did have some good things that were going on back then. They probably didn't feel like it was such a great thing at the time because of all the work that they had to do. But now we know more things, and we can make life happen easier because we're sharing information. And now is the time that you have to admit to yourself, I don't want what they're giving, so I'm going to have to make my own. That means you have to, by necessity now, grow your own food and find your own sources of sustenance. Otherwise, you're going to be altered by the program. And then they have it on the technological end. So it's literally the terms that they use when they say that they want to dominate all aspects of the human domain. And that includes everything from the energy that you use so that you can use your mind and create things in a standard of living that we have now, which is like having electricity, having cooling when it's hot, heating when it's cold. These are all things that they want to shut off. And there's a reason for that, is because that when a human being has all of their necessities taken care of, what they do is they use their mind. And when they use their mind, they invent things, they come up with new ideas. And as we all know, from the way that they're trying to control the matrix, so to speak, is that they want to control the ideas or stop them from happening, period. And that's where we get into this new era of two different worlds of information, where what we call misinformation, the other side is calling truth, and what they call truth, we're calling misinformation, or vice versa, or however that affects. So they essentially have the entire planet arguing the classic divide and conquer strategy, while they're changing their food, they're changing the way that they live their daily life. Like if they really shut down the amount of power that they want to shut down, and more areas become unstable, like obviously they're doing. Europe is becoming completely unstable. From what I hear, China is actually on the brink of becoming unstable themselves. What better way to make Russia also destabilize is to put a war at their front, doorstep. And then over here in the U.S., we have massive amounts of people coming up, and at the same time, feudalistic cartels. I mean, there's so many cartels now that it's hard to keep track of the names of them. And they control different spots, and they control the flow of people. And now it's becoming militarized, and where
they're controlling eggs now too. I thought they were, smuggling eggs now.
Yeah, I even shared a video the other day that that's what they're finding coming over the border is eggs and poultry and stuff. People are trying to smuggle food into the United States so that they could eat within the means of the money that they have available to them. And that right there should be a scary indicator. And that again also goes back to the biome manipulation, because why are they saying we're having a problem with eggs? Why are they calling a bunch of chickens? Well, they're saying this or this other thing is making it unsafe for us. So the logical next step from that is to go to the private owners of the food production, which is the next step. I mean, it has to be logically in the turn of events that they're doing, is that the independent farmer, the independent gardener, the independent chicken grower, and then we can get into, conspiracy theories recently about a lot of people growing these products at home, trying to be self-sufficient, are having issues because they still have to buy products from the matrix, and that's a source of possible contaminants that make life hard to do. So people are not only going to have to start growing food for themselves, but also their livestock and their chickens. And we have to go back to a world that lives off the planet, but they know that as well. And that's why they're aiming for a less populated world where they can have easier control over every individual person on the planet.
Yeah, and you wonder why all the changes right now. Well, if we go back to the grand solar minimum and these cycles that reduce food production globally, you have to ask yourself why right now. These same events could have occurred 10 years ago. Why wait until this decade to do it unless you knew this cycle was here this decade? It would cause so much chaos anyway, just naturally from not providing enough food because of depleted soils, not enough solar radiation, the wrong kind of solar radiation, atmospheric circulation's out of whack, magnetic fields on the planet are not keeping cloud cells and jet streams locked in like they would. I mean, there's just an enormous amount of things that are changing, as well as, the magnetic field on our planet. You got to think about the hemispheres of the brain of humans, their magnetic fields as well. So vast changes are here. So if you do ask yourself why right now, why is all this happening right this second? You can look back through the cycles and see that it's the onset of another one that's already a known onset time period. Originally in the Adapt 2030 channel, I was only focusing on the 400-year cycle from, say, the modern minimum, coming back again now. But then, you start to look a little bit wider in history. And I went back to about 2,400 years prior, 6 of the last grand solar minimums. The last one, 2,400 years ago, Homeric minimum, Homer, that time frame. But then you start to look in further geologic records and you really see a lot of big changes on a very, very clean time clock. 8.1 K cooling, and then there was a 4.1 K cooling, and even just that alone, then 0, and we're going to skip that one. But there's variables within there, because think about it. If it goes 800 or 8,000, 4,000, 0, then we're only at 2,000, so that should skip us. But included in there are 2,000-year cycles, which I believe we're sitting on top of right now. But then intertwined in there was the original 400-year cycle that I was looking at to show that there was another one starting now, and it would be that alone itself, a 400-year cycle, would be enough to disrupt everything enough where, well, society would have to start over just based on the past. What happens when the food production drops out, even in what you consider agrarian societies? All these other grand solar minimums happen when the population of the Earth was under 1 billion. Most people grew most of their food, and there were still vast amounts of movement of people because they couldn't feed themselves. That kind of weather change. So you got to put that in context for a second here. Now we have 8 billion people. Technology is better, obviously. But why now? See, then you start to understand, yeah, this makes sense. Why all this is happening now? Because they're positioning, and I would say then I'm talking about the elite parasites, to try to maintain control coming out the backside of the cycle change. And yes, for some it will be a cataclysm. For others it will be a birth and a renewal. Any of these cycles that you see when they come to completion, I mean, well, what do you think about a year? You come to the end of the year, it's the 31st, Happy New Year, things are kind of set and new. For the best example, day and night, you wake up in the morning after an evening or a full day before. Well, it's going to be nothing more than that, except this is a 2,000-year cycle. So what happens? Well, society is going to change greatly anyway. And another thing, China has collapsed. The last 10 of these grand solar minimums. Now, if you do classical research on this same subject, Homer minimum, the Homeric minimum, is pretty much, I mean, the details are terrible. there's hardly any information going back, basically word of mouth, that you have to believe from some scholar who said something in the British from that studied far back to the Phoenicians. All right, that's what we're supposed to believe. And yeah, there's some written record, very minute amount of information about that time period, anything back. But the Chinese kept pretty good records on their society going back 4,000 years. See, that's the difference. China kept amazing records for 4,000 years. You know, and there are other cultures around India as well. But when you swing over to the West here, it's like, what? You know, it's scraps of this and a broken head off a statue over there is to define the time period for us when it goes back 2,500 years and past 3,000, 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. Come on. Give me some solid, and not, it's hearsay at 5,000 years, you know? It was the same with the Clovis people, and yeah, you know, Ransom, I know you about the Clovis people. You know, it was guaranteed that 13,000 years ago, that was it. That was the oldest. And then they started finding layers that were 25,000 years. And I forget the doctor's name who did the research on the Parna Point site, I think was the area. They basically destroyed him, ruined his reputation. He had to continue his digs on his own with his own finances, and then he proved them all wrong. But now they're finding layers at 130,000 years, which makes sense for me because that's the last interglacial. So if you want to go wider time frames than a 2,000 year cycle or a 4,000 year cycle, go to one full glaciation period. And see, even in North America, they still found a full cultural layer at 130,000 years ago, which it would have been them entering into the interglacial of that period some 118,000 years ago. See, that's the kind of stuff we're missing. What happened to the last peoples who were in this interglacial? I mean, does it even really matter? We're sitting here now with our tech that's about to get squeezed, pulled, broken, depowerified, if that's a word, or unpowered. Directing evolution seems to be something that is, it would be easier to do if you knew the cycle, that's for sure. Like if you had that advanced information, you had just not even advanced, but just the information, the cycles. Because I've always wanted to get into the Vatican Library and look around and see what they brought back from Central America, South America, some of the more remote islands. Like imagine when they went to Easter Island themselves first and pillaged everything, like what kind of records are there? Well, what happens to the first persons that were down there in Aotearoa, like New Zealand, you know, took all the records from there? And is the first contact really the first contact? I don't know. But think about all those records of all those cultures that knew their own cycles based on their own either myths and legend passed down through oral traditions, or if they'd actually kept written records of it and passed it down through generation and generation. The next generation would write it on the best new tech medium. Maybe it went from stone and it moved to, I don't know, slate. Anything. There's a million possibilities. Clay, like cuneiform tablets, have survived 4,000 plus years. That's a lot easier than carving all that on a stone, pressing, you know, variable shapes to create the syllables and consonants that you need in cuneiform. That's cool, easier, and it's a specific type of mud. All right. Every grand solar minimum, China collapses. No ifs, ands, or buts. The last 10 out of 10. So you can't tell me that this is going to be something. She is trying to be the first to stop and avoid this, but you already see they're in the collapse phase, right? They were trying to get the grains from Brazil, direct delivery, going around South Africa and then up over through the Indian Ocean to try to see if they could get a direct trade route with Brazil, cutting their reliance on American grain, but they already realized that ain't happening. So they're stuck, and they just don't have enough food. So you look at all these lockdowns, you go, really? Was it about that, or was it about limiting people's calorific intake per day? You know, because you're going to get the equation of how much food's not available versus how much the people are not going to have, and how much you're going to need to limit their grocery store purchases, and they're not going to be happy with that. Or you could lock them all down, and then you're not force feeding, you're just restricting the delivery of calories, and everybody will get a certain amount. So then you cut out the calories, yay. So everything's at equal now, but it's going to step down next year again. So then what? because I am going to say, I think I've talked about this on the show once or twice before. When we were originally doing the forecast of how much decline there would be agriculturally per year, on the declines of how much food would disappear from the system. And it would be noticeable to all at that point. But then COVID came and they locked down. And remember, the cafeterias were closed in stadiums, any of the food and beverage, anything with catering. And about 40% of that food's wasted, 20%, a good solid 20. Because the restaurants, they can repurpose things into different dishes, but catering, it's a one-time event. There was a huge amount of loss in cafeterias at schools and universities, workplaces, anything that was a dine out. You know how many people went out for lunch across every city in the world at lunchtime? Like how much food was consumed at all those little restaurants, those mom and pops that are out of business now? You close down all the cafeterias, you close down all the schools, you close down all the food and beverage, you close down all the meetings, all the expos, nothing, and all that food suddenly got pushed back into the food supply because it's not out there being wasted. So that was my first thing, is like, man, it's getting kind of real because they're locking the planet down and everybody has to eat at home. So all that wasted food is suddenly no longer wasted. It's now usable in a different form. So they just gained 20% of the world's food supply by not allowing people to go to restaurants and shutting down all those food venues. Everything now is pretty much from the store to the plate at the home. Restaurants were closed, businesses were closed, everything closed. So now we're getting sort of close, obviously, to that point again, where even that 20% has been eaten up already. Food prices are escalating, and we're going to step down drastically this year in food production in the Southern Hemisphere. Like, it is going to be the most mind-blowing. I'm going to throw a unicorn out here for everybody. What's this today? Please remember this. It is the 26th of January, 2023. I am predicting that in August of this year, August, September, October, November, the ozone hole season in the Southern Hemisphere will be a catastrophic collapse of ozone, unlike anything ever seen or recorded, ever. It'll be so fast, so ferocious, so all-encompassing that it will make the news feeds across the planet. That will be your key indicator that we were way ahead, a year ahead on the UVB damage from the barley crops. Because already seeing that mesospheric ice crystal cloud and all that destruction of ozone with chlorine and bromine on those flat surfaces of the ice crystals. More ozone's breaking down. There's the most ice clouds up there ever in the mesosphere for that breakdown to occur, ever. By orders of magnitude, not even 10 times more, like 1,000 or 10,000 times more than normal up there. Not even doubling, or like I said, 100 times. That's way too small. We're talking orders of magnitude, really 10,000 times the amount of ice crystals up there for that destruction of ozone to occur on the flat ice surfaces. We're going to be at that point again where we got down to the bare minimum of the food production is either teeteringly dangerously close to a little bit below, or it's going to take a giant step down of the amount of food produced on the planet for the amount of people that we have currently, 8 billion. Like, if you can put that in your head of the food production or the food consumption got stopped and redistributed during the COVID time in 2020, 2021, 22. Now we're coming into another point again where food is going to be not as available, and you're seeing the food price rises now. So governments would much rather be proactive in stopping you going to the streets. So food's going to be the main contentious thing. I just saw $9 a dozen eggs today in New York. Now that's unacceptable, and you can't. People are going to be going to the streets pretty soon, and a lot of other goods are following. So Ransom, I know I rambled there for a second, but I did have a question for you, and that's the whole reason I was talking like this. What is this new in-ground insect thing that they've approved in the EU to add to flour and different types of foods over there? What does that do to, you were mentioning the gut. I'm curious in terms of gut health, like, do we need to drink more vinegar, or do we need to, I mean, what do you do? It's a new type of food introduced. I don't know what the effects would be after we consume that. Is
Actually,
it a hollow calorie, like drinking a beer? You know, those hollow calories. Are they going to be like hollow proteins or something?
I think they're just trying to switch that over, well, for a couple of reasons. One thing about eating insects is it's actually really dangerous because there are unknown viruses, lots of different viruses that live in the guts of the bugs, and they're talking about grinding it all up and making it meal and adding it. They get to reduce prices of grain that they don't have access to, so they're replacing a percentage of the food, the real food that they were using in the ingredients, with things that are now that they're going to use to replace that. That's one thing. But another thing is let me throw you this weird idea that I see coming really quick, coming up in our near future, is something that they're going to be pushing. And you've seen all the crazy ideas that have been going around, something new to science, ideas that just don't quite click with what we grew up knowing is common sense and scientific method and things like that. But this is a paper or an article from the World Economic Forum right here, and it's talking about how artificial intelligence is helping us decode animal language. And you get into there, and it talks about, how that they could use this to talk to the elephants, talk to the dogs, talk to the cows, etc., because it decodes maybe the meanings, and somehow that we're going to allow the animals. So mark my words, the animals are going to say they don't want to be eaten. They're going to say that they don't want to be eaten. And then not only can we not eat the meat because of environmental reasons, we can't do it because of legal and moral and animal rights reasons, right? And why do I know that they're going to do this? Well, because they're already prepping us for it in the way that they're trying to give us, lab-grown meat, lab-grown chicken, etc. They're trying to replace everything that we eat with some kind of product that we can't get without going through them. That's the goal here. And whenever, fields are contaminated, like, here's an example that they could do just easy. Maybe I should be in an evil think tank, but as it stands right now, they could launch, 10 or 15 neutron bombs, blow up several cities or areas, and then all of a sudden that those areas, they'll say, hey, that's radioactive, despite the fact that they use the technology that is not going to leave lasting fallout or radiation. How are you going to know that, right? You're not allowed to go there. We can't grow there. Don't worry about it because we have, hundreds of thousands of tons worth of bugs that we've been growing in vats. And we got this lab-grown meat. And besides, because of the moral, all of the animals are dying and stuff like that. We're the sixth great extinction. So we got to save the planet by not killing the mammals and stuff that we usually eat and we have been eating for thousands of years. But instead, grow this stuff that we made in the lab. Lab-grown meat moves closer to American dinner plates. And what they're going to do is just throw it out there, just like they did the bugs, like they're doing the bugs in Europe right now. So think about this. You have the people that are convincing you that there is, all of these measures needed to be taken because of some epidemic that happens that just so happens to give them the power to lock everything down. At the same time as they're saying that you have to close down your farms, you're going to have to get rid of your cattle because, they're farting and it's destroying the atmosphere, or whatever lame thing that they come up with. I mean, think about it. We live in a time now that climate change has got so bad that it went from storms, flooding, and global warming all the way over to its stroke season. Think about it. Right now, it's stroke season. Did you guys know that? It's heart attack season. These are things that are happening now. Because of climate change, you might just have a stroke this time of year. You might have a heart attack this time of year because of climate change. Well, that's weird how the climate turned from weather phenomenon over to medical conditions, but I digress on that. But it seems like they do have a plan, and they've already got it covered in all of these little areas of think tanks. And a lot of people think that they're going to be untouched by it because they've been dabbling or gardening or whatever as kind of a hobby But the fact is you guys are going to the store and you're buying all of the stuff that you need to have these farm animals, and you're going to the store to buy all the stuff that you need to grow your plants, your fertilizers. You're using a lot of products from them. And no matter how far you try to get away from their food source, you still have to buy their products, or for the most part, which means that when that becomes unavailable, everybody's going to have to stop literally going out to eat, because guess where? You brought that up earlier. They shut that all down to practice how they could use food as a weapon, as Henry Kissinger once said, use it as a weapon. And that's exactly what's going on right now. They're formatting it where you have to go through them for products, whether or not you're one of the people that live in the city and you don't produce your own food at all, and you can't because you live in a city, so you have to go to restaurants and eat. So that means if they have any new mandates, they just shut down the restaurants, they shut down the food. But don't worry about it. They can give you a little printed digital card, which they're already doing in the states that have welfare programs. They send out a little temporary card now. It's not even like a permanent credit card like they were doing for a while. Now it's just a ration card. That's exactly what it is. And, all of these restaurants have to buy their food from the manufacturers who are using the GMO products, maybe the new products that have a little extra, spike in their drink, so to speak. So you have no choice but to come up with a barter system amongst like-minded people in a community that all grows and makes products. And people are going to have to start making their own products again, because you brought up how China, and I did too, everything is pointing and directing to that they'll probably have a war to try to cover up the fact that they're a failed state, and they're becoming a failed state. But the problem is the United States is tied up 100% in all trade. So if they fail, we fail. That's what's coming.
And we'll be back in 2 minutes and 2 seconds. Ransom, check your Telegram feed. I sent you a fair few videos of strangeness to take us through the next hour. Dave DuByne, your host, with Ransom Godwin. We'll be back right after the break. Continue our conversation about ancient history meeting modern civilization.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Hey, and one thing we wanted to talk about was essentials for a survival pack that you might be wanting to carry in your car. I personally think, having a farm out here, that some sort of folding saw, hand saw, is going to be essential. And obviously, the larger it is, or the longer the blade, like a 10-inch blade, 12-inch blade, it's going to be much easier to cut. Whether it be creating a shelter for yourself in an emergency fashion, or removing debris off of somewhere, or cutting a trail through the woods if you need to get from point A to point B. Again, it's all about trying to get into the next set of situations so you can assess what just happened in a safe manner. Ransom, what do you think? Do you agree having a folding saw is something that would be on your list?
Almost all the survival experts agree that you need to have one of these, and they far outweigh axe that's really labor intensive for hours versus one of these where you could whip down a tree in minutes and make a shelter. I actually have one of these in my pack. It's one of the best tools that you're going to have in there, because if you're going to do anything as far as making wood or making any other utensils, maybe out of wood, fires and shelter, this is the quickest way to do that. And you're not going to want to be spending all of your time doing all of this really labor intensive stuff. So one of the first things that you would do in a survival situation is put your mind at ease. And it's a lot easier to do that whenever you can have supplies for a fire and a comfortable situation immediately.
Yeah, that's true. Speaking of that, how many swings of an axe would it take to even chop up your kindling, when all it takes is 2 pulls with a saw of that length, 10-inch, 12-inch blade? Those teeth are incredibly sharp. And with these types of saws, one of the advantages, it's so fast and so perfect in the way that it cuts. You hardly have to use any pressure on it, and each pull or push of the saw just removes an enormous amount of debris or cellular structure of that wood. It's like cut, and you're already through something that's, an inch or a couple inches. It take you 3 or 4 pulls and pushes on that saw. You can get through a huge amount of wood, especially getting your kindling ready. Because you walk through pine forest or whatnot, or any kind of forest, there's a huge amount of dead stuff still that's on the tree that's just simpler to saw off with one big long pull than it would be to get down on the ground, and it'll be much drier. It's safety in terms of snapping things on your knee or, swinging the axe. That's also a danger in itself. A hand might be in the wrong place. A thing could bounce back. It's just easier to have a saw than an axe, for sure. I agree with you on that.
Even on the labor side of things, you're not going to want to be spending all of your time doing really labor intense things. It's something also you can put in your pack that doesn't weigh down your pack with extra weight. Things like this is what you put in your pack, are tools that are very handy and multi-use. The main thing is we're talking minutes versus hours as far as setting up things. Like you said, you can saw through a small branch in seconds, so you got all your kindling for your fire. In minutes, you can chop logs compared to whacking at a tree for hours and hours and actually not getting this anywhere near the same kind of results.
Yeah, because how sharp is your axe, really? And it does take a little skill to use an axe effectively, because in your first times trying the axe, you're going to miss a few places, right where you think the axe might strike and you'll chip out that bit. Sometimes you miss and you got to hit it 3 or 4 times before you actually remove that piece. Saws are just so easy in comparison. So I also think it's a must have.
If you want to get some of these items to help yourself, help the show, click the link in there. And
yeah, and like Ransom said, you want to help the channel and keep this type of information flowing. Every purchase you make helps us, so we can continue to bring you this information. Yeah, click on that link in the description box below, whether you listen to it as a podcast, and every podcast description also has the links. And if you see this in a video format on any of the streaming platforms that will upload after our broadcast here, those links will be in there as well. If you appreciate this type of information, click on that link in the description box below. Support our broadcast, our continued mission of bringing you information that can enhance our lives, make our lives more comfortable as we move through this transition. And we know there are going to be breakdowns in systems along the way. This is just an insurance policy.
Yeah, support the broadcast and support yourself. This is a saying I like to say, help me, help you. And this is one of those things. You can help us by helping yourself.
And remember, any purchase that you make with the links, whether it be through the podcast in the description box or on the videos across the multiple platforms after we stream, helps us keep this type of information and this show on air. That's going to make a huge world of difference, sharing information in communities.
First hour, talking about the cycles through the last 1,000 years and how we come to the precipice again, and all of the things culminating around us that we see in the world are nothing more than reactions to a known cycle, and how governments might try to control citizens when food's less available, and also the transition of the economy, because through history, these grand solar minimums and these cycles that we're entering, the economy just shifts and forms, and it takes a new way to trade, and what's considered value. It shifts, it changes, has every time. But then it stabilizes, of course, after. But it's just this zone of transition, the entry into the new cycle is, that's one of the scariest parts for what was once stability. It's like once you get that understanding, and so that's how I did it. That's how I started to look at it in a different fashion was, if this cycle's truly here, then there's going to be a lot of changes that can be identified. 3 of them: population migration, economic restructuring, and then government collapse and restructure. Because see, the way that you would rule over citizens would be different each time as well. And that's really interesting, because Ransom and I were talking about this the last hour, that it seems like, we're being poised in positions back to feudalism. And again, whatever form it takes, it will take a different form. During these grand solar minimum periods of low solar activity, when there's not enough food for the populace and everything, there's uprisings and population migration, these collapses of the economy, the local fiat of the time, almost, all of them didn't survive through that. Gold and silver did. But on the backside of it, the system of governance changes every single time. So I'm looking at it again going, it's changing every single time, so we're back at the change again. And these signals are so clear now. Looking back in hindsight, looking at this information, I put out these graphics called the fingerprints of the grand solar minimum. And what's happening around the world is you're actually in the center of the fingerprint right now. because the cycle's onset already. We're in the beginning. The cycle's begun already. We're not waiting for it. It began somewhere around maybe 2017, 18, very starting to get measurable, 20 so measurable that everybody's going to see it, that you can't not see it. It's so in play. You know, look how far down it's come in terms of all the events across planet, whether it be climate or whether it be government or whether it be whatever society and civilization. In the last 2 years, you've seen more change than probably in the last 100, minus World War II. You know, these kind of drastic shifts just don't happen because they can. These are forced changes. Because stability, the elite can milk more wealth without having to control populace. And for them, it's easier management system as well. If you want to look at it that like a farm, the earth's a farm, different farming management techniques for individual countries, communism, democracy, socialism, constitutional republic, whatever way it is, it's a farming technique to control the citizenry for output. If you look at the farm, Earth is a farm, you know, that's kind of the way you'd have to look at it. And if you also have to take into account, if you believe there's a group of people who actually control the planet, you know, if you're going to go off on that direction, then you have to have that belief before anything else would make sense in that whole understanding the changes and then manipulating the changes and controlling the backside of the change. Anyway, we're going to get into something new in the second hour here. I sent Ransom a couple vids before, and if you appreciate free speech, please consider Revolution Radio here, keeping them on air. The running costs, production costs, donate tabs right at the top. Again, you know, there's going to be value is going to shift during this change. I am pretty sure of one thing. Information will be the last thing to go in terms of value. Like, information will be the most valuable thing, I think. You know, it wasn't as important when things were really, really stable over the last 50 years. But now we're coming into a point where things are so unstable that if you can get truthful, factual information, that is going to be value there in itself, because it'll help you move through and be more prepared to see the changes and move through the changes. So if you consider that a valuable thing, keep myself and Ransom on air here. Studio AE Revolution Radio, donate. Ransom, floor's back to you. You know, coming in the second hour here, I know you had something to say, and I forgot to write a note, my bad, before we dropped off on the break. So, floor's yours.
No, I was just kind of talking about, you know, how interlinked we are with China as far as trade. Even though there's been tensions and everybody thinks that, you know, we're having issues, trade has been going on like normal. 100% of what we were doing, we kept doing, we're still doing. We're totally interdependent on that for the U.S. dollar. Just like we were with the oil, we are with trade with China too. So when things start dominoing economically, as far as, you know, you can look at Europe and see that the economic outlook for the countries that are, you know, getting rid of all of their weapons and giving it to a conflict that's right in the middle of, you know, basically near the cradle of civilization. I mean, you got right up there by the Black Sea and all of that whole area. This is where all of these wars come out of. It's like they picked that same spot to do it over and over again. Or you could, you know, use the example of the Crusades. Every time it seems like they need to reduce the population and reset the information, this is the same strategy. It's just like we're playing the game again. Now it's just technological, and there's so many moving parts that they realize that people have a hard time paying attention to all the little pieces that are moving. And that's kind of why I want to, you know, point out how the food and your freedom as far as ideas, they've kind of corralled that or kettled your free speech into the social media world of the internet. And, you know, I've brought up many times that they are planning on replacing that internet as well. The internet that you're used to, the internet that you're used to getting your ideas and sharing your ideas, conveying your ideas, trading your ideas, all of that's about to stop. And they're about to create this thing called the metaverse. That metaverse is where it's a completely corporatocratic, you know, interface where when you go there, it's like walking down the street and seeing 20 Starbucks on the same block. That's what they're planning on doing, but they want to connect this to your digital currency, which they plan on for whichever emergency they're about to use. I mean, you can take your pick. They're given so many choices right now, but they all lead to the same place, and that's a top-down control mechanism where they end what we know of as the paper dollar, the fiat dollar, and they replace it with this digital dollar that they could take away or give at any time. They can ration if they want to ration it. If you say you had $1 million in your account and you wanted to go buy a bunch of food and stockpile because you see that things are going weird all of a sudden in real time, they could just turn that off and make you only have enough money to use per day. And we've seen that over and over in different countries as they become destabilized, that their banks won't give the money out to them, or they put a limit on the amount of money that they could get per day so that they could do their daily life, turning people that had prepped or saved money into the same exact group as every other peasant that can only get their rations per day. And a lot of people think they're protected from this idea, and they're not. When they switch this over to a digital currency, all of your ideas that are they consider bad ideas, maybe even your habits as far as health goes, will be all put into a computer, and an algorithm is going to decide if you're a good boy or a bad boy, whether or not you're allowed to have your rations. I wouldn't even put it past them to start regulating property based on these ideas too. But first, they got to finish with the setup. And like you said, we're not waiting on it anymore. It's happening. Every move that each government makes is about either hoarding their own supplies or cutting off the supplies to the public. It sounds conspiratorial because it is. And they put it in your face. So there are still people all over the planet arguing whether or not there's this group running things when they literally meet right out in the open. And they come from all the different countries. They go there, all of these corporations, the news media, the bankers, all of them get together and say, hey, what are we doing for the next couple of years? And what they're doing right now is obviously culling the population through a multifaceted, full spectrum attack on population. And they're doing that with war. They're doing that with the food. They're doing that with sicknesses and destroying the immune systems planet-wide. So now is when the rest of us that know this is happening have to stop the denial and act like it's not actually happening and don't worry about it and let them keep incrementalizing this nightmare system. And now we have to start bartering and all that other stuff. You sent me some videos that kind of, I saw one, I couldn't figure out how to copy the link to show it, but them putting up anti-aircraft stuff on top of a building. And that's what's going on in Russia right now. They're preparing to be invaded, obviously. I don't think that they'll actually, go to the point where we use the style of nuclear weapons that, have a 50,000-year shelf life of radiation, the plutonium type weapons that they use. I think what they'll do is they'll go with the non-lethal type, which will further scare the rest of the world. And we're already dealing with these ideas. And now they're admitting to creating it and so to speak, or directing it. And that's what I've been saying for, show after show, is that's exactly what they're doing. They have a plan and they're implementing it. They're not asking anybody for their permission. So we need to start implementing our plans, which involves, taking your health and your diet in your control. And it's going to become harder and harder, but you have to ease away from these products. You imagine if, it really becomes a reality and dawns on the population what's going on just from a health standpoint about the food-like stuffs that they serve in restaurants and grocery stores that aren't actually food. If more and more people come to this realization that their entire life is being created to be a suffering individual with bad health and just be a consumer and a customer to the state from cradle to grave, where they tell you what you need to do all the way until when you get sick, and then they tell you what products you have to buy then. They never tell you why you're really getting sick. And a good example is think about all of these cancer charities that they have out there. Let's race for the cure. Let's do this for the cure. They always say it and they word it in that way. When's the last time you saw a race for the cause? Have you ever seen that in your life? Like a charity that's like earning money to find the cause of something? No, it's always the cure. It's always treatment. It's always a product. And this is when we have to take this power that they have over the public and take it away from them. And it's as simple as growing your own food and finding your own sources of health and medicine. And this is what terrifies them, because you just take away their power. So their only option is to try to govern you into a position where you can't do that. So while it's still semi-free in most countries, and we've seen what they planned, they showed us the last 2 years. So everybody should be on board by now, but they're not. And that's kind of what I was talking about. There's the other half of populace that's in a cult mentality that will protect the system all the way to violence. And this is a problem we're going to have to overcome. But I think if we take our future in our own hands and we start taking our health and our food and our diet and all of that in our own hands, people are going to start seeing us leading by example and wonder why, hey, how come they're not overweight? How come they're not dying of cancer? How come they're not this or that, right? How come they're prepared? They're going to start wondering this. And what happens if people just stop going out to these box restaurants and eating? Well, they'll realize that they're not getting their products out. And this is where we will force a confrontation of ideas, at least, to go back to a more reality-based existence on Earth, where we figure out our own problems. And when we do that, and we have the clean food, and we have our gut biome in check, and our mental state is better because we know that we have prepared, or at least we could adapt to situations that are coming at us, everybody will start doing more prosperous. And the other people that aren't, basically the people that are in the cities that are dependent on the system, will start seeing this type of lifestyle and realize that one is better than the other. And it's that vibratory thing that you were talking about. It's a fact that we have to do that. We're at the point, like you said, so many cycles are coming to fruition right now, where it's obvious that times for humans is about to change into a new era. And that era is halfway, at least halfway, up to us, each individually.
It is. And speaking of that, some rotary grow technologies, Ransom, if you check the inbox or the chat there in Skype, I sent you 2 videos. For those of you who are joining us live on the streaming over on Mountain High Time or Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast, both on YouTube, as well as Vigilante TV and Rumble, Adapt 2030. These rotary grow technologies are going to be implemented by all of us as well. You know, the solutions that you're going to have to try to get responsible for yourself are going to have to be way more efficient than the old ways that we did it. So you can do it, you know, with these vertical plastic pipes and, you know, put LED lights up and down, and it's pretty much a DIY system. But again, you know, I'm worried about contamination on the plastic because I'm not sure. It's in a grow medium, but again, you're going to be in plastic. And then what happens when the plastic breaks? Okay. You know, but in the beginning, these efficiencies, and then the rotary grow drum is in rock wool as the barrel spins around the center. That, Ransom, that's the first one I sent you there. The light rolls around. You know, they're silent. They're LEDs. Yeah, it takes a little bit of energy to drive a motor. So what are the efficiency gains? And again, you know, if you're going to do this by yourself in one home, how many people do you have and how many rotary grow devices do you need, like from Omega Garden or whatnot? How many of them do you need to feed a family? How much additional rock wool will you need? What kind of seeds, all these things, the fertilizers for to grow everything indoor. So if you're not on supply chains traditional style, then how do you get all of this? Is there a way to make natural rock wool from things around in your own environment that can mimic rock wool? Or compressed matter? Because when I was in Taiwan, they were using coconut coir in tubes, and you would pour, they drilled, you know, 9 holes down a vertical tube of stainless steel. And they had coconut coir in the middle, and wherever they drilled a hole, you pushed your plant in there, one seed, and it germinated in the coconut coir and then popped out. But the water was at the top, and it had to have that medium for the roots to grow in. So could you replicate that by, you know, finding some dried leaves and dried whatever around your own property, or some mix of that? You know, what about rock wool? I mean, what's that replicable as? How do you make rock wool? What percentage of something is it to get the draining factor? You know, what kind of silica do you need? It will affect the plant root uptake of the minerals, and you know, to figure these things out. But it's all going to have to be automated. That's the thing. To get the efficiencies where we can be self-sufficient in this day and age, we're going to require the efficiencies. You're not going to be bending over with a hoe 6 hours a day weeding the thing. We're going to have to be growing it in where there's no time spent weeding at all, but it still has to have the same nutrition content. And I'm sure, you know, during good summer days, you could wheel these same devices out and get not only the LED in the evening, but also the daytime regular light, what do you consider out in the middle of the day. You could, pest control would be way easier. You wouldn't lose much to pest. But again, you're going to have to set aside a space for that, whether it is or whatever it might be. Part of your house now is a piece of furniture. Like, how can you incorporate other stuff around there? But keep in mind, there's water around it. It's going to be a more humid little microclimate there. And also with the neighbors, I mean, who knows how to repair? Let's say this is driving on a regular small motor. Does somebody know how to repair that motor? And I don't even know what kind of motor it would be. Just something that has a couple of gear wheels on it that could move. But still simple in terms of engineering and electronics and things, like a motor just to spin something slowly with gears is going to be a simple repair compared to almost everything else. But I certainly don't have that skill. Could you and think about the skill of maybe rewiring an alternator on a car? I know, Ransom, you can do that. You can start from that first strand of copper wire and then rewire an entire alternator to start producing current again. That's a skill set. So these things are all going to be learned in time. But I didn't like to see that, Russia's actually gone now to the steps of starting to put anti-aircraft batteries on all the buildings in Moscow and stuff. So, like, for me, as an uptick in terms of the next step you might want to get ready for, because that's a huge signal that something's about to flare off way bigger than it has been to this point. Because you don't go to that extra time and effort to put all those anti-aircraft batteries on the tops of buildings in a city unless you really think there's going to be a problem there. So for me, that is a huge, huge step. You're putting anti-aircraft protection around your capital city. Okay, something's up with that, really. If you even just look at one sign, that would be it. So what if it were to go off? What if it does start as just conventional? We'll just leave it at a conventional war. How much would it disrupt your supply chain, and how much time would you have to get to the bank to actually get physical cash out, or get that cash and turn it into something else? Because as soon as that were to happen, really within 12 hours, the stores what you saw for toilet paper battling or whatever, and in the beginning would be nothing. So people were really going for the food this time. The smart ones, at least. So then what? Then it cocomes back to your supplies will eventually run out, and you're going to have to start thinking of ways to replenish them. That's the whole thing. Think beyond the prepping. The prepping is just like a basic step, like getting you out of your situation. If you need a go bag out of your car, or you need a get home bag, that sort of thing. That's to get you to the next phase so you can really assess what's going on. Get out of the emergency phase and get to an assessment phase. But to move through here, then what? Prepping is your assessment phase. That's it. You're going to have to be thinking the replenishment phase. You need to skip past that prepping thing. That's only an interim step. Just like cryptocurrency, a lot of people are talking about crypto and central bank digital currencies. Okay, distributed ledger, these sort of thing, liquidity on demand. That was RippleNet's on-demand liquidity protocols. XRP, but they were eventually going to move, this was around 2030 or 2032, to Hashgraph. So cryptocurrency, what you know, is only an interim step to Hashgraph. And the way that it's a quantum computing ecosystem of instantaneous settlement amounts, all instantaneous, anything that's connected, anything can settle instantly. Like, you know, right now with crypto, you got to go through a fair few steps to get it. It's faster, way faster than banks and Swift and everything. But in terms of everything transacting and settling amongst everybody at the exact same time in the exact same seconds of settlements, and every single second it's zeroed and resettled again. That's Hashgraph. That's where they want to take it to, because then everything can be tracked in real time of literally where you are, what you're purchasing, if there's anything in your body that could measure intake of foods and this sort of thing. It would all be in real time, literally real time, every movement on the planet of anything consumed or bought or sold. That's Hashgraph. Now, there might be different names for it in terms of, I'm sure it's going to blend a few more technologies that I haven't heard of or I'm very unaware of, you know. Even me trying to describe what I see and knew as Hashgraph with what they're moving from cryptocurrency to, it's the same. It's just an interim step. So prepping is an interim step to you getting resilient to replace your stores, to get on that mind frame of that will be your lifestyle. Pioneering 1860s, think the Amish, and you shall survive, and you shall not have to jump through any of these hurdles. And that's when they say the meek shall inherit the earth, is because when you get back to that point, you're going to have very little connection with the electrical devices and very little consumption of all of this stuff that you're going to have a metered society to get through. Eventually, they'll probably charge us for air. But right now, it's everything else. Air's on the way, Ransom. Air is going to be the new thing that's going to be metered next. Get in now. Get in now. We got a token for that.
Isn't that your carbon footprint already, though? I mean, aren't they already trying to charge for air?
I got a Sasquatch CO2 print.
Yeah, but they're already trying to do that. I mean, that's basically the excuse that they're using to cut down food across the planet, is a tax on breathing, saying that the activities of mankind, are causing CO2 gases, which, by the way, we need. Is that something we're going to have to hide? In the future, there's going to be little farms hiding, and they're pumping CO2 into their, greenhouses illegally, so that they could get more food output. And at the same time, they keep saying these silly things like Al Gore. I'm sure you saw a meltdown last week, and it's amazing that they still invite people who have made so many predictions. They make Nostradamus look like, he was legit. I mean, Al Gore was so far away from all of his predictions. You would think that, I don't know if there's a word for the opposite of psychic, but that would be him. But Jim Cramer,
invest the opposite of Jim Cramer, and you'll be hitting it. The same thing, right?
Right. I mean, these people they're kind of gifts, aren't they? I mean, to the public, for any rational, critical thinking person to realize, hey, well, this person keeps saying stuff like for years and years and years, and none of it happens. So he must be lying on purpose, or he's just, the peanut gallery, I guess. I don't know. He doesn't have a real opinion because he doesn't understand stuff. What makes more sense is he's a scam artist. That's what's going. And, why do these people that keep telling us that the oceans are going to rise buy beachfront properties? Why do the banks keep investing in those areas? Why do the insurance companies keep covering them? Well, the truth is because all of those industries don't believe in it, and they know that it's a sham. And the idea that we cannot grow enough food or have enough food for every living person, even with the 8 billion people that are on the planet right now, is preposterous. We know that's untrue. It's regulations, it's mandates, it's government control, it's government activities, it's banker rules, banker lobbies that make certain situations happen. And they're going to govern us into a famine. It's not a real famine. Like, there may be cycles going on that will reduce the amount of production that they could do if they were trying to do it 100% and actually accomplish it. But the truth is they're not doing that. They cull their own animals. They turn in their own vegetables. People are paid not to farm. I mean, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And then you mentioned, like real environmental things that will reduce population through not enough food growth, and they know that that's happening, and they're betting on it. They're using these programs to even further sell their products, which I brought up a while back that Bill Gates was talking about how they were going to have to move their crops around the planet because they're environmentally sensitive. So they were already talking about yanking farms and moving them someplace else by 2030 and 2050. So they already are banking on this idea. And if you take these people at their word, it depends on what you're listening to, because, on one end they're doing something, and then on the other end they're saying something. I'm one for following people's actions and not really what they say. So what are they doing in the background? I don't know. Making products to fit niches that shouldn't exist is one. But let's get more basic. What is like Bill Gates and all these billionaires doing in their free time? They're making organic seed vaults. They're saving DNA from all the animals. Why would they be doing this unless, like I say, they're trying to control every aspect of it? And, you keep hearing these ideas come out from people like Fauci, and we saw it happen in China, where Fauci's talking about, you know what, the next thing is we're going to have to delete all of our pets because, they might be carriers and it's hard to control the populations of them. So, you know what, we should just euthanize all our pets. And that's along the same line of thinking as the government trying to tell you which farm animals you can grow, like some of the more wild species that grow hair. You're not allowed to grow them in certain areas because they consider them wild, even though they're not. People have been farming those same kind of pigs and, sheep and other things, goats. And now that we're in a position where even though all of those people out there are farming, the producers, the ranchers, the herders, whatever you want to call the entire spectrum of people that produce food, they're buying these products from these companies. So they're in a weird situation where they're going to have to go back to more older times on how they feed their animals, so that there's clean food sources for us. And that was really an amazing thing that you showed there. I played the video of that. That's the kind of ingenuity that I think will bring us into the next era if more and more people say no to this nightmare system and start being innovative in creating more easier ways to do things, smarter, not harder, but incorporating some of the old skills also, the old know-how that, they used to read in the Farmer's Almanac every year. Like, they were pretty good this year. They said it was going to be a cold winter. Every indication was it's going to be a cold winter. It's pretty cold so far. There's enough water to replenish most of the droughts that have been happening. And I don't want to bring this back up, but, I keep wondering what happened to all that stuff on the Mississippi. Is that still, have they cleaned it up? Have they moved it? Or is this an emergency about to happen? I don't actually know because I haven't looked back into it, but what's going on with all of these shipment situations that kind of stopped getting talked about? Earlier at the beginning of fall, we were talking about all of these grains and different things that were kind of stuck in places, reduced rail line activity, reduced trucking and things like this. And now it's probably most likely going to have severe flooding throughout the central United States and even in the West, because all of this snowpack is going to melt. And then they'll be saying that that's climate change because of the flooding, even though this is a cycle that we see happening all the time. But now we're going into new cycles. So what are we to expect if our magnetic field continues to collapse as far as food production? And how does that benefit the people that are pushing out their plans right now? In my view, it's right on time. So I don't think any of it's an accident. When it comes to these little plots that they're doing and they have been doing. I remember, 20 years ago when people were first talking about Agenda 2030 or Agenda 2020. Now, all you have to do is go look at those things, read them, and see if that hasn't mostly happened already. If all of that hasn't happened, and if it has, what do you think is going to happen with the new plots and plans that they're telling you they're going to do now? In my opinion, that tells me that they're not. It's not plots and plans as so much as things that they're already implementing, because it seems like by the time they tell the public about a plan, they're already doing it. And I'm sure you saw the whole thing where they want to vaccinate all the bees. So it's every aspect.
Hey, Ransom, I'm going to tell you already, people have been having their channels taken down talking about that.
Oh, well, they're giving the bees a additive to help them out. I would put it that way.
Yeah, additives. That's a great one to use.
Yeah, so they're attacking every angle of everything. So there's all your flowering plants and stuff. So even if you're at home what do we do about that? That's a good question that I've been wanting to ask a lot of people that, are greenhousing and farming on their own. How do you stop the progression of the other technology that's out there intermingling with the natural world? And an example of this is, the grains that they were growing, wheat, corn, rice, etc. People had organic farms that were growing heirloom types of corn, rice, wheat, but their fields became changed by an additive by a certain corporation. So in a sense, they couldn't hide from the rollout of this technology. So how are we going to in the future protect these kind of crops from being manipulated in a broad spectrum, like we are being manipulated because they're adding it to the main food sources that everybody eats? Like regular, everyday, average Joes are just going to the store and they're getting some milk, they're grabbing some beef, a pork chop, they're getting some butter, whatever they're buying. These are all manipulated products at this point. So how do we back out of that all the way? I don't know an Amish farm, right now. I did when I lived other places, but it's hard for me to just go out and say, I need to store some milk and some eggs. And the whole thing's becoming criminal. Back to the egg smuggling. The whole concept that human beings on the planet are trying to find ways to feed themselves for cheaper ways without other people controlling it. And the fact that they're making those criminal activities. And the Amish are a good example. How many times have you seen over the past 20 years Amish people being raided for this, that, and the third? It's scary is what it is. So where does that put us? We need a renaissance of innovative new ways to counteract the other system. And I don't know how to do that, by myself, but I think trading ideas is where it is. And that little device that you showed that was rotating the plants on a small light source, that's genius. I mean, you're getting all those plants to absorb the same light without them getting in each other's way. So you're getting the maximum output with the minimal effort. And that's what I've been trying to do here just as a hobby, is a minimal effort garden where I'm trying to just grow stuff in every little nook and cranny. Right now I have wild stuff growing everywhere because I just keep dumping seeds. I found a wasabi lettuce outside the other day, and it was delicious. And it was just growing there in a little crack between the bricks. And it was like enough to make a good salad out of, or the salad 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, to answer the question for you, I sent you a link for the solar polar fields that are now reversing themselves. So that's kind of interesting because the solar polar fields, it's a north magnetic hemisphere of the sun and the southern hemisphere magnetic field of the sun. And once they reverse themselves, that's the signal of the end of the solar cycle, because they're reversing. So the 11-year solar cycle that is only half of the cycle. Yes, indeed, it brings us from solar maximum to solar minimum. But the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere only reversed once in the 11 years. If you want to complete the cycle to bring them back to where they were, they have to reverse again, and the north has to start in the north again and end up in the north. If you want to complete one of the cycles, it starts in the north, it reverses with the south. That'll be like one solar cycle, solar cycle 23. And then we'll come to the minimum, and then it'll go back up to solar cycle 24 again. And when it comes down to minimum, like we are, and we started at solar cycle 25, that'll reverse, and that will be back in the same place it was. So the actual real cycle, if you want to keep them same, is 22 years. So when we look at this, see, that's an indicator that the solar cycle's finished and it's starting to reverse and go back into a different polarity. Excuse me, I almost fell off my chair there. I have one of those sitting chairs and the arm was off. So what does that tell us? That this solar cycle, if it continues with the fields like they are, would be one of the shortest solar cycles in the last 200 years. But see, that would also be expected coming into a grand solar minimum. So another thing in correlation to kind of answer your question in a roundabout way is, if this reverses itself, the magnetism, the electric field on the sun would be much diminished. The magnetic field would be. So again, that would have an influence on our Earth, which would have a more diminished magnetic field. So you got to wonder how these changes, it's more about how quickly they'll occur. Because, what I'm seeing here, it kind of dovetails into, we've noticed, and we've said this a few times just in passing by accident. I don't know if it was just, we tapped into the ether, but it seems like they're speeding up. Seems like they're on a time clock. Seems like they're going all out for it because there's nothing left to lose. There's a lot of conversation like this. Why is it? Is it that they just got the same information ahead of us a few weeks or months or a year? They have better tech to look out further than what we get publicly? Because the public release of this is off the WSO, solen.info, SOLEN.info. And if you just put in solar polar fields, once you get to the site, it shows, the polar field strength is declining back near, it's almost at zero on the southern hemisphere, reversing coming to change to be the northern hemisphere. That's at zero. And declining out of the northern hemisphere is at about 22 degrees or so. Now, they don't exactly meet at zero before they cross. But the way it looks, within another month or so, they're going to cross. This is almost a vertical pattern. They're reaching toward each other. But think about completing a circle. Like you got two lines just on the one edge, and it could make a complete circle, and you just draw that one little edge in there, and boom, that's what exactly the same setup it's showing here magnetically. So the reversal should be, where the south started reversing, and that's the craziest thing. This literally be one of the shortest cycles ever recorded in solar activity, at least in our, like I say, last 200 years, going back to the early 1800s, if not further back. Again, this verifies that we said, well, it seems like the elite or whatever, they're on wow, they just sped everything up. Well, this is what I'm seeing. If I saw this information too, I go, you know what? We're about 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years too short, the solar cycle this time was expected to go all the way until 2025, 26. Well, what if it's now? That's why you see everything seems to be gobbled up so quick, sped up, pushed on top of it, because maybe they need to speed up 3 or 4 years. Because this solar polar field reversal here, I'm looking at it and going, ooh, that explains why there's in such a fervor to get it done, because the field's just reversed. And once it does this time, even you naysayers out there who don't agree with this grand solar minimum concept, and they're like, no, they said that solar activity is super strong now. Solar cycle 26 and solar cycle 27, unanimously, NASA, European Space Agency, Pulkovo Observatory in Russia, and anybody observing shows that we're heading into a period of 2 solar cycles of extreme low that we haven't seen since the 1600s. Top count for some of the years would be 6 sunspots. Average 6. That's some of the forecasts out in 2030. So when we come into solar cycle 26 and 27, they absolutely know when we go down this one and go into solar minimum, it goes cool, it stays cool. John Casey talked about this and said, yeah, this one will be a short one. If it does come on, it will taper into. So I don't know that, there's too many things that are overlaying that. This is happening faster. It's a much more powerful cycle than even the elite had powered or counted on through their records that they kept. That something is sped up, and this is happening faster than was anticipated. Because you got to think there would have been a plan behind this, a game plan behind this. But now suddenly everything's sped up because the sun just sped up and has collapsed into reversal. And the magnetic field shall decline along with that too. I know that's a long answer, but sometimes, dude, I can be long-winded.
Yeah, it does kind of seem like, from a conspiracy theorist standpoint, that, the elite would like to get the bang for their buck. So when they pull all their little programs, they might want to do it along a cycle. They might think that there might be more volcanism, more bolides coming in, more opportunity for, Armageddon, so to speak. And they plan around these things. We know that they do it on a smaller scale, so why wouldn't they do it on a bigger scale? And I was just reading this article about the one of the closest ever approaches by asteroid that's going to make an approach right now. I think it's basically
Southern
during
Hemisphere,
our show.
yeah, it's down near Chile is where it was supposed to spin by.
Yeah,
that's the
and
kind of news I peruse.
And we see this constantly now. And you were talking about would they tell, like, how much would they tell you ahead of time, or how close do they know? Like, how long ago did they know this rock was coming in? Because they pretend like they just noticed it as it's coming in. The comet, they didn't know about it till it got here. And they do this all the time. I bet you could do a Google search on the history and find, like, I don't know, thousands or hundreds of thousands of articles about asteroids that they didn't know were coming until they were leaving, or, and they constantly do this. Now, my question is, what are the odds that one of these things would have an easier time impacting the Earth if the magnetic field happened to be collapsed at that time? Because we know that these are electrified objects, comets, asteroids. They have some kind of charge on them, positive or negative. They're going around the middle of the sun. I'm sure that charge is being manipulated by all of the objects in our solar system. But they're never, when they come through, it's always a specific set of circumstances, like as far as what's going on in our solar system. Right now, we're having, a solar cycle with the sun, and the Earth is behaving in a certain way. So how does that manipulate stuff? And we were talking about this over and over again, how in 2024, we're just going to happen to have a lineup of 4 gas giants on one side of the solar system. And during this time, we're also having this magnetic, I don't know what you would call it, an anomaly or the completion of a cycle here. And then you have whatever's happening with the sun at the same time. So it seems like we have the best odds for some kind of turmoil happening on the planet Earth, whether it be volcanic, something hitting the Earth. And at the same time, as you would think that all of these governments and institutions would also know that, they're ramping up their apocalyptic, ideas, famines, pandemics, wars. And it does seem to be at an accelerated pace. The incrementalism over the past 50 years has now become incrementalism month by month or week by week. And it's every day that we get a new revelation of something awful that we see the powers that be have done or set up. So the incrementalism is no doubt speeding up. The question is, when is the singularity where all of these plans and plots and events kind of cross paths, and when is that singularity? I think what we're going to first see is some collapsing economies that will be the first excuse of why all of these things they've set up over the past years are coming to fruition. Mainly the reduction of food, the reduction of products, the reduction of standard of living. When they cut the power and reset, and I've mentioned this many times, in order to have a reset, you have to shut everything down so that you could restart the new program. It's the same in computing. It's the same with government. It's the same with, civilization as a whole. It is bizarre there. And I was looking at that. So we're right at that flex of the magnetic field crossing over and reversing. But what about on a big scale? Is it like, do you see the magnetic pulse, that is? Because I don't actually believe in a physical pole flip or anything, but magnetic field is enough to manipulate all kinds of stuff. We know animals react to it. We know plants react to it, ourself included in the animal group. And it brings me back to the idea that you were talking about these different vibrations that we're going through. It seems like an experiment on the magnetic fields of human beings was just done on humans as a whole 6 feet space. And we know that those fields, when they interact, it changes our behavior whenever we're in the space of another human being. So you can imagine this being manipulated further with electronics. And not only that, but the whole idea that these ideas that they gave us, don't look at people, don't get around people too close. In the backdrop of all of these things, they're turning off the humanity. And I'm sure you're familiar with, some of the inhumane things that happen in China to this day. Like I've seen videos of kids getting run over on the street and people just, going about their day like nothing happened. People falling out on the street and nobody cares. And America has turned basically like this. I think it's not all the way like that, but for the most part, any person that watches TikTok or World Star or any of these things, they know that the amount of people acting bizarrely has increased. And then you factor in the fact that they're having shortages, maybe on purpose, maybe not, of medical treatments that they've hooked people on for decades now. So these SSRI reuptake inhibitors that affect people's moods and change the way they think, they're just going to get cut off of all these. So they have created a norm for millions of people that is going to change. And you were right earlier when you were talking about, we have passed the point of trying to just prep for the immediate right now. Of course, it's a good idea to get your things together where you can deal with the situation right now in a hurry. But we're trying to figure out long-term strategies of human civilization, and that doesn't include, just grabbing a bag and going and hoping for the best in the woods. That includes lots of planning on a civilization scale where, like, I know so-and-so, they do this, I'm going to trade with them, I'm going to keep communication lines open. How do I do that? If the power's out, how do I run these little machines that are helping me do my agriculture when the power's out? How do I actually permaculture, use permaculture, as a way to grow stuff and where you live and learn how the earth changes, because we're going to have to learn that. And there's going to be new nicks and crannies and discoveries on how to do better with growing food and different things. Like each year that I've tried to grow food was completely different than the year before that. Some things did good, other things didn't. I couldn't figure out why things that were growing great last year just all of a sudden didn't want to grow. And then other things that I wasn't really, counting on, they blossomed into a lot of food. Like the first year I started farming, I planted like 3 okra seeds outside in my garden, just 3 of them. But all 3 made this big giant bush that was putting off okra every 2 days. I didn't realize you were supposed to cut it off and make it continue to grow. But now that I know that, I realize just those 3 little plants would give me 4 or 5 giant bags of okra to either eat or have massive amounts of seeds that I could spread around. It may not be that great, but we're going to have to face the fact that we're going to have to go back to eating things. And here's a question for you.
Let me talk about the okra. Yeah, you need to cut it when it's small, because if I like to eat it when it's like the size of your, let's say, your pointing finger long. If it gets really much bigger than that, or as wide as you can stretch your forefinger to your thumb, like if it's a good 4 or 5 inches, 4 inches, yeah, you don't want any longer than that. And you got to continually cut it, and you're going to get literally a ton. I'm not even kidding, like thousands of pounds of okra off these things. They're so prolific, and we grow the red and we grow the green both. But you got to cut them when they're much shorter, and yeah, they just continue and continue and continue and continue. So make sure if you have them that you plant them where you can get on both sides really easily. Like, don't put it in the back of the garden where you got to move around stuff, because you're going to be harvesting every single day off that one. That's a great one.
Yeah, and it seems like all the North American kind of plants, the traditional corn and squash and stuff like that, while your corn's growing in the background, your squash is producing every day. And, I've been having a lot of heartburn and stuff lately, and I know that that's caused by, pH balance issue a lot of times, so where you're not being alkali enough. And when you have that issue and you go look at like all the foods that you want to eat to get alkalized, you find that it's all of these replenishing foods like squash and all of these stuff. So it's obvious that the plant itself is there to help you go through the entire summer with fresh foods, and then you stockpile enough to, of course, eat in the winter. We're just going to have to go back to that lifestyle. The grocery stores are not, in my opinion, a secure, dependable source of food. We're going to have our own hunger dryas, and that's going to be the shutdown of corporations handing out food.
Yeah, how long will they continue to hand it out, though, is the question. Because you look all around, there's an enormous amount of different organizations asking for more help because their normal donations aren't going in, especially for food banks and this sort of thing. So even relying on that, you're gonna have to come to a different system end to it. Like, all of us, whether we talk about growing food or if you're on food assistance and you're getting, things from a food bank every day or week, you're gonna need to start thinking that that's gonna dry out too. So already start thinking ahead in the future. Like if that were to stop, if it did stop and you were prepared, it wouldn't be like super paranoia. But if it stops and you're not prepared, then that's why we talk about these things. How do we see into the future for us to get ready? Because you said, when does the singularity happen? Ransom, I think we're already into it. I think it's happening in front of us in slow motion. Like when you're in a car wreck. I've been in a car wreck once when I was younger. And everything's slowed down in super slow motion. You can see everything like second by second, but it seems so clear, like it took a long time to get there, even though it was just like milliseconds. It's kind of like that. I think we're in the singularity at the moment with all these things happening, but we just don't realize it as a civilization right now. We're already in it. It's like, that Star Trek was it Star Wars when they hit that thing into hyperdrive and it took that one split second and then they started into that first trails of light before it took off. And then we're right at that thing, right when you're starting to notice it, right at that hyperdrive flash moment, just the streaks of light are coming just before it goes into hyperdrive. That's where I think we sit today. I really do. And I think those aligned with Earth energies and those aligned with trying to get back off the systems, there's a vibration involved in that. And that vibration, I think, will hopefully separate us into two worlds. And I really believe it. It was already separated by your thoughts anyway. But I mean, in this really succinctly, where we would be invisible to eyes and our eyes would be invisible to them as well. We won't even exist on each other's planes because the vibration will be so starkly different that the planet could rift into two and there'll be two Earths. Heard this one before too, traveling in the Himalaya around a campfire one night somewhere. Where was that? In the Shimla Valley. Had that conversation in the 1990s. So interesting, it just popped back into my mind just a second ago. But the vibration, the frequency that we're putting out to help others and to harmonize with others. It's its own flame. Proud. Thanks for listening, David here tonight. Signing off. Ransom, Godwin. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to Revolution